Everyone, X Spartan 1000 here, and we are back with another Marvel's Midnight Sun build video. Happy New Year, everyone. I hope you all enjoyed the holidays. Before we get into it, I want to address the last build video. First off, thank you for all the new subs and all the people that viewed that last build video. I made that build video to be more of a sustain and jack of all trades sort of build. It wasn't necessarily leaning only towards tanking, and it wasn't only towards like max damage and healing as well. It's basically an all around build that'll definitely get you through the campaign with ease, and I believe there is some useful things that'll carry on to the late game as well for the harder difficulties. I did say that I did want to do a revised update of it as I got farther into the game or as I completed the game to go on to do the harder difficulties. So I do intend to revisit that build video and try to update it to see, what needs to change and what needs to, or what can stay for it to be viable, because the main focus was light for that build video, and this one is going to be all about darkness. So how you can use the most darkness abilities and try to make a viable build out of doing so. So let's jump right into that. Um, we started with Last Sight. I think this is a good damage ability, and right now this is early game stuff. But Last Sight is really good because if you can execute somebody with this, you'll gain concealed. That would be nice, especially if you can see that the enemies are going to target you on the next turn. They won't be able to, they just lose out on their turn completely. The modification for this was very good. In my opinion, I like the bleed, and the reason why is if you can't kill somebody with this ability, but you do draw it and you want to attack, this can allow you to do some decent damage over time. You'll be dropping 100, and then you'll be getting a bleed stack applied to the enemy. I think it's very useful to be able to apply negative status effects to enemies, especially in higher difficulties, and it just feels really good in the lower difficulties. So, highly recommend doing this. Merciless is another good one. Now, the damage on this seems pretty weak. However, if a target is stunned or in a bind, the bind portion gets added to it once you upgrade it. You will do an extra 304 damage on top of that 76. This is scaling up with you. So you want to knock someone into an electric box, or perhaps have someone like Spider-Man bind them. You can even have Nico stun them. This is basically a card that's supposed to be used if you're set up. It's not going to be very strong if you're not getting set up. So you want to make sure you get set up, and then this will pretty much just pulverize somebody. Especially if you're running passives that can double your damage, because that means the passive damage of that 304 also gets doubled as well. And then you'll gain a resist on top of that. Resist is the modification that I chose. I think resist is one of the best positive effects in the game other than strengthen. And the reason why is because resist is getting you out of taking damage. Strengthen's really dope because it's letting you, it's basically a damage buff. And then I think third behind that is resilient, because that's when you resist the negative status effects, and that's honestly pretty huge as well. But definitely recommend picking up resist, because even if you take that negative status effect, you still took no damage for that turn, and you can just cure yourself if you take an item to do so, or if you have a character in your party that can cleanse abilities from you. So highly recommend Merciless for stunning or for destroying targets that are stunned. Wild Strike is really good in terms of just straight up getting straight to the point, doing damage. Starting out, has a decent amount. I think the upgraded version takes it to 190. You will gain a vulnerable for using this, but with Wild Strike, I found it's very good to use this whenever you have, I believe it's the Obsidian Collar, and that's when you have double damage for the next dark card that you play. That's an attack card. So it's going to do way more than this 190. And then one of the modifications is if the target's at full health, you get an extra amount of damage um, for that target. So a lot of the times, if you're running at least 2 or 3 wild strikes in your attack commands, you are going to just like blitz somebody and kill them. Especially if you can find a way to use items to strengthen your character or to put a vulnerable on the enemy and then attack them with this. while you have that while you have that Obsidian Collar passive up. So highly recommend Wild Strike. There's another modification when I had a second Wild Strike card that gave me Quick. And I don't know which one I prefer. Because the Quick is really great as well, because when you got that double damage, you're definitely going to kill somebody. Um, so then you get the card back for free. Not the card, but you get the player turn back for free. So that's very helpful. Something to keep an eye out for. Mindbender was another one that caught my eye because of the heroism that you can gain. You're getting +2 on a redraw. You'll be able to cure yourself of any negative status effects. So honestly, if you're spamming out Wild Strikes, you can use Mindbender to get out of that vulnerability state without using your items if you don't want to, or playing a card to cleanse yourself of it. So this makes it more worth it to spam Wild Strike having Mindbender in there. You can also target an enemy and they will attack their nearest ally. At the low level, it does 1 attack, but at the high level, it does 2. This does work on bosses. Now, granted, Scarlet Witch has an ability where she can make a bunch of people attack each other, but this can still be useful, especially if the pieces on the board are basically set up in the correct way for it to benefit you. So I highly recommend Mindbender. Annihilation is an interesting one because it doesn't look like it hits very hard, but when you have your heroism stacked up to 10, and if you can strengthen your character, whether it be through Doctor Strange doing it for you, Nico, or possibly giving yourself a potion to do so, you can really soup your hunter up to do some pretty crazy damage. And this is an AoE spell, so if you are increasing the passive stat to give you extra AoE damage, you'll be able to take out crowds of enemies, or just straight up finish off an enemy that has uh, either small amounts of health or just straight up one-shotting them. So Annihilation is very good. But the drawback with Annihilation is you have to have a lot of heroism. It's not about cheesing the system. So like using Nico's Empower so that the card can be used because your heroism is free. It's like 0. You need to have the maximum amount of heroism to see the most damage for Annihilation. So definitely run some items to boost your heroism, or drop some support cards before using this ability so that you can have 10. Whip is an early game ability, and I like Whip just for making plays with moving people around. For example, you could use Whip to throw somebody into a fuse box to stun them, and then follow up with Merciless to do that extra damage for them being stunned. So Whip is nice because when you upgrade it, it does not cost any heroic energy anymore. It's just a 0. The one thing I don't like about Whip, though, is that it will discard a random card from your hand, which isn't great because there are times where it can throw away objective cards. There are times where it can throw away ultimate. So it's definitely a risky thing, and that tends to be like a trend with Darkness. Anybody running some sort of full Darkness deck will know that there's some drawbacks to the cards that you play. So just beware, be wary of those drawbacks so that you don't mess yourself up. It can apply a weak to an enemy. Weak is a nice negative status effect to enemies because they will, in return, not be able to do as much damage to you while it's up. So this is good to throw on a boss, especially if they're about to be enraged or if they have some sort of damage buff on themselves. So definitely a good idea to keep some negative status effects in your deck so you can apply those to the enemy to make the fight easier for you. Mindbreaker is another very good one. It applies 3 Berserk. I will say this move is a bit of a wild card because just because you're mind controlling the enemy doesn't mean they're your pet. They can still attack you. I think it's better for you to use this card when your character and your party members are positioned away from whoever you're using it on, because they're likely to attack the nearest target. And they're going to do 3 attacks in a row. So this is good for those enemies that have riot shields, Any character like that can hit you and apply some sort of negative status effect. I think it's very good to mind break them, especially when they're around their allies, because they will apply all those negative status effects to their teammates and completely waste their turn. So highly recommend Mindbreaker. When you upgrade it, I believe it reduces the amount of heroism it costs. If you redraw it, you can get a resist. I like the idea of having multiple ways to get resist in my deck because I like not taking damage for whenever there's a bunch of either minions jumping me or if the boss is just hard focusing me. So highly recommend those. There are some other moves I wanted to consider or throw in there. Dark Heal is good. Recently, since I had Nico in the group, she's been healing everybody, and I'm also been running with Ghost Rider so he can self-sustain. So we haven't really needed it. But you can throw Dark Heal in here to look after your teammates. Just keep in mind that you are taking from your pool of health to heal other people. It does give you 2 resist, which I'm definitely a fan of, because you'll be able to take 2 hits in a row of not being of taking any damage. Plus, you could have there's other ways to access it through Merciless or through redrawing Mind Break. So you can have multiple resists set up already. So highly recommend that if you're trying to get as much resistance as possible. Dark Blessing was good in the beginning because it helps you upgrade all your it gets all your cards in your hand to the upgraded form. But once you actually upgrade your cards, it's not that great anymore. Um, I I would recommend not using that. I think you could make better use of your cards, whether you go more of a neutral ability or just still stacking up all the darkness ones. All Out is great. But the problem I had with All Out was it was discarding the entire hand. And even with the upgrade to draw 2 cards, it did not seem as worth it. When you think about moves like the Hell Ride that discard your entire hand, you want to see some damage in return for that. And 152 just was not steep enough for me. Annihilation is AoE and goes way higher than 152, potentially going higher if you have your Obsidian Collar passive ready. So I recommend skipping out on All Out, but if you can find use for it earlier on, go for it. But I think in higher levels, it's going to not be that great. Um, and as of right now, I haven't. I think this is the majority of the darkness abilities. If I'm missing out on one, do let me know in the comments, and I will try to do an updated version of the darkness build because I would like to try to tackle the higher level difficulties with a full darkness build, and the same thing with the, for the most part, light build slash neutral abilities that I used in the first build video. I want to upload videos of the hardest difficulty or just the series of high difficulties with these builds to see how viable they are, and then do updates for them as I see fit for survivability purposes. For the passives, um, Dark Champion is very good, and so is Shadow Stalker. I do want to try to start using Dark Champion more because of the DPS aspect of it. Because the way I've been playing Darkness has basically been all about dealing the damage. There's a lot of utility in the mods that I've chosen, but my main focus when I'm playing the Darkness path is just to try to deal as much damage and apply as many negative status effects as possible. So definitely recommend Dark Champion for getting that extra damage out. Shadow Stalker is nice because if you redraw a heroic card, you can go invisible. It's nice to be untargeted. But there are times where I pull the heroic card and I just want to use it. So I found myself not using this that often, and maybe using this is going to be better in higher levels whenever you see a whole bunch of enemies targeting you, because that means they would miss out on their turn whenever you redraw a heroic because you'll be invisible. So I guess it depends on the situation between Dark Champion and Shadow Stalker. Obsidian Collar, I think this one is very good. I'm finding it very hard to not use it because you only have to play 3 dark cards in a row, and I'm running a full darkness deck. So anytime I use 3 cards, I get this passive, and it's going to double the damage of the attack cards. And Wild Strike is very good, especially when enemies are vulnerable or if you're strengthened. If you're running somebody like Nico or Strange again that can buff you up some more, you are really going to be running through people with Wild Strike and all sorts of attack abilities. So this is my starter build for the Darkness Path. I am going to do a revised update for those people that want that really late game content for the ultimate level difficulties. Be patient with me. I am going to push out stuff like that. I just want to make sure I set a basis for people who are in the beginning and still unfamiliar with these sort of games and want to get some interesting builds out there to help them with their gameplay. And then, of course, I'll always try to make late game content because I love late game content, especially with these types of games because they're real brain teasers. We're trying to figure out what works and what doesn't work. But that's enough rambling for me, guys. I hope you enjoyed this Darkness build video. Please check out the light/neutral build video that I already dropped. And I will be back with more live streams later on this week. I'll catch you guys in the next one.